pošto se već uveliko priča o tome da Rio Tinto nastavlja svoje planove za iskopavanje litijuma i pravljenje potencijalne ekološke katastrofe u toj nekada lepoj zemlji u kojoj smo živeli, ja sam hteo da nekako pokušamo da demistifikujemo stvar, dakle da pričamo sa nekim ko bi bio ekspert, ali ko je neutralan u odnosu na poziciju ili opoziciju u Srbiji. Tako da sam došao na Oksford i imam priliku da pričam sa profesorom Markom Gudejlom sa, is that the right pronunciation?
Gudejl.
Gudejl, ok. Da razgovaramo sa profesorom Markom Gudejlom o stvarima koje se tiču praksi u svetu vezanih za iskopavanje litijuma i koje posledice to može da ima po zemljište, po ekonomiju ako hoćete, u pozitivnom ili negativnom smislu, ali mnogim drugim stvarima. On se bavio time u svojoj knjizi koju je napisao u slučaju Bolivije, gde se nešto slično dešavalo i sada bih volio da uporedimo te slučajeve. Sad ću preći na engleski, tako da ćete morati da se oslanjate na titlove. Hello Mark, and thank you very much for speaking to Radar.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Can you please first tell us something about your academic background?
So I'm an anthropologist, and I've been conducting research in Bolivia for over 20 years. And I wasn't really interested in lithium until relatively recently. And around 2018, 2019, I became interested in lithium in Bolivia because Bolivia has the world's largest reserves of lithium. And so I applied for a research grant and was awarded funding for 4 years to study Bolivia's efforts to deal with many of the same questions that Serbia is dealing with. Should we begin mining lithium? If we do, what are the consequences going to be? How is our lithium project, how does that relate to the green energy transition and to global pressures? What are the different actors involved in the lithium project? The political actors, the geologists, the scientists, technicians, the communities that are going to be impacted around the zone of lithium extraction. And so just in 2023, we finished our 4-year project, and this year I'm writing a book about lithium based on that research.
Okay, so just by this list, we can tell it's a very complicated subject with a lot of nuances. So how did you manage to understand all these aspects?
Well, so first of all, I mean, the one thing about lithium is that it requires an interdisciplinary expertise. One person can't understand all of the different aspects that are involved. I mean, there are geological questions, there are issues of chemical engineering, there are political questions, economic questions. You have to understand political science, because obviously lithium extraction is not like gold extraction or silver extraction. It's part of this broader global project of transitioning from fossil fuels to so-called green technologies. So in our project, we did several things. We had partners in the project who came from many different disciplines. So we partnered with scientists in Bolivian universities who work in chemical engineering, geology, synthetic chemistry, and other sciences that are involved, hydrology, involved in the process of lithium extraction. I myself, in a way, was responsible for the cultural, political, economic, more of the social dimensions of the project. And then we had another researcher on the project who spent time in the communities around this area where the lithium is being mined. But it's important to have a broad-based knowledge to understand the different dimensions of lithium. And I think over the course of my project, I learned enough engineering, geology, chemistry, to be able to understand what it is I was learning during the course of the project. But it's definitely a very complicated project. It's too complicated for any one person to really understand and explain in all of its complexity.
Yeah, what viewers may or may not know, that science projects nowadays mostly function like this, in teams. From specialists from different areas research different aspects, and it's interwoven in a way, and it gets published like a multidisciplinary work. So in short, like, what did you find? What did you realize what you didn't know before you started working?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things before we, you know, I know we're going to lead up to the Jadar project in Serbia, but I mean, I think one thing to mention is that there are kind of two broad forms of lithium extraction, lithium mining.
First, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but for the people who may not know, what is lithium, what it's used for, why is it important?
This is the kind of question I get asked at cocktail parties a lot. You know, when I tell people I'm writing a book about lithium, sometimes they ask me, well, what is lithium? And honestly,
you have it in your cell phones.
Well, exactly. And honestly, I will say, and I have actually a part in my book where I write about the fact that before I really started studying as professionally lithium, I don't think I could have answered most of those questions about what is lithium. I mean, I knew that lithium-ion batteries were used in our electronics, but why lithium and why is lithium important and where is lithium found in the world and how is it mined, that was all something I had to learn later. But to give a very sort of short answer, so lithium is a metal. It's an alkali metal. And that means it's a very light metal, and in fact, lithium is the lightest metal in the universe. On the periodic table of the elements, lithium is number 3. And over on the left side of that table, you have other elements that are usually found with lithium, like magnesium, potassium, sodium, which constitutes salt, the stuff we eat. And lithium is the lightest of those so-called alkali metals. But the thing about lithium, you might ask, well, why lithium? Why not sodium? Why not another element or another mineral? And that just has to do with, and here, without going into too many technical details, some of which I'm not myself a chemist or an engineer, but basically it has to come down to the fact that lithium, when it's used in battery chemistry, in batteries, it has certain characteristics which make it ideal for producing and storing energy. So as I said, it's extremely light, but at the same time, it's also capable of producing a tremendous amount of energy density, the amount of energy per mass, let's say. So it has these...
So far, so good.
So it has these characteristics which make lithium an ideal mineral or element to be used in these batteries. So as you mentioned, it's used in cell phones, and in fact, before electric vehicles, which is really what everybody's talking about, lithium was first used in consumer electronics. And now we're talking about only the early 1990s. And it was Sony, the Japanese company that makes camcorders and cameras and other kinds of things, that first introduced the commercial lithium-ion battery. And that's just because chemists, people who are working, were looking for a battery that had exactly those characteristics. Excellent energy density, stability, durability, these different kinds of characteristics that can go together. And as you can imagine, if you put magnesium or if you put another element into a battery, you would sacrifice one of those characteristics, but you might gain durability. But it might be so reactive that it would blow up, or it wouldn't have the same kind of energy density. So lithium turns out to have a kind of ideal set of characteristics which make it really good for what it does in terms of batteries, rechargeable batteries. So it was found to be an element and that was ideal for these uses. And just coincidentally, in 2019, when I started my project, in that year, the Nobel Prize in Chemistry was awarded for the 3 people who invented the lithium-ion battery. Total coincidence. So what this means is that not only is it recognized as an important technology, but it's also relatively recent. So lithium has not been mined for batteries and electric vehicle for use in vehicles for hundreds of years, let's say. It doesn't have the same history as gold, silver, coal, other kinds of elements which your viewers or readers might, listeners might know about in Serbia, right?
Therefore, we know a lot less about all the aspects of lithium mining.
Well, so I mean, I mean, if I can talk more about lithium and why it's important, and people, we can ask another question about lithium, about its use in batteries in general. So this is a more of an environmental question. We're in the midst of a global energy transition away from oil and gas toward so-called clean or sustainable forms of energy. And in that transition, lithium-ion batteries are playing a central role. It's not the only one. If you think about solar panels or wind turbines, these are all part of the story. But because batteries are used in transportation, and transportation produces around 20% of all of the carbon emissions, lithium-ion batteries play the most important role in the so-called green energy transition. And that's a technology which is, scientists are doing research on other kinds of technologies, but for the time being, lithium-ion batteries is going to be the technology for the next 15, 20, 30 years. So the thing is that we do know what it means to do what Rio Tinto is proposing in general to do in terms of an underground hard rock mining. Because in South America, where I do my research, lithium is not mined from rock. It's mined from brine, which is a fluid. So if you think about a highly salty liquid that has elements like magnesium and lithium and other things, it's pumped into pools, which are then evaporated by the sun, leaving at the end of over a year of evaporation a large mountain of white powder. And then that white powder is purified to take out magnesium and potassium and sodium to leave lithium carbonate, which has to have a purity of over 99.5% to be used in batteries. So that's important to keep in mind, because getting from whatever the raw material is to 99.5% is a chemically intensive process. That's not something which can be done through evaporation. It has to be done through various kinds of chemical processes. But the other way that lithium is mined is through rocks. So this rock, this element, jadarite, which I didn't know about, but I learned a little bit about, which was discovered only, I guess, around 20 years ago by Rio Tinto exploration geologist. And it contains different kinds of things in this ore. One is boron, and the other one is lithium. And what was interesting is that they've known about this for 20 years, but in 2002 or whenever it was that they discovered, maybe 2004, the market in lithium was nowhere near what it was today. This was before Tesla's first, roadster model. This was before all of the green deals and so on. So there was a market for lithium in 2004, but it wasn't really electric vehicles. It was going to be at a certain point consumer electronics, and they use lithium for things like to treat mental illness, bipolar disorder. Lithium is used. A long time ago, in the mid-20th century, it was used in nuclear weapons, actually. The hydrogen bomb uses lithium. But the market for lithium for electronic vehicles, for batteries for electronic vehicles, is very new. So the reason that Rio Tinto, I think, in particular is so interested is because now the market for global lithium has completely exploded.
It's huge.
Just over the last 4 or 5 years. And when I started my project in 2019, the price per ton of lithium carbonate was around $7,000 US dollars per ton. And when I ended it in 2023, it hovered around between 50 to 60,000.
Wow!
So it's the demand for lithium has caused the market, the economics of lithium to explode. So of course now the great rush for lithium has begun. There's lithium in Portugal and lithium maybe in Germany, and of course this apparently huge deposit in northwestern Serbia, which could be the biggest deposit in Europe at least. So
but so far that sounds good. I mean, it's branded as a green technology, a part of transition to green technologies. And also, as far as we know, it's necessary to continue these transitions. But
so the thing is, lithium itself is not a green technology. So what's interesting about lithium, unlike say solar energy, which is truly renewable, and wind, which is truly renewable, lithium is a non-renewable resource. In that sense, lithium is no different than oil. It's no different than gas. The difference, of course, is that it's destined for use in a technology, a battery, which itself is destined for use in an electric vehicle, let's say, which doesn't produce any carbon emissions from the tailpipe. So to that extent, it has an ultimate use which might be seen as greener than, say, the use of oil in a fossil fuel burning burning car, but that doesn't mean it's a green technology in and of itself. The end use of it is different than the end use of, say, oil or gas. That's the difference. But if you focus, which I'm sure your listeners in Serbia are perhaps most interested in, is what are the environmental consequences. And I think one of the things, what I've seen, what I've read just preliminarily about Jadar, about this part of Serbia, and what's going to make this so unusual, even in the world, is the fact that it's going to be in a zone of agriculture. It's going to be in a zone where people live, and it's very much unlike the lithium mines in Western Australia, which still produce the most lithium in the world. Although most of the reserves are in South America, they don't produce as much lithium because Bolivia, which is what I studied, has not actually started producing lithium carbonate at an industrial level for political and other kinds of reasons. But if you look at what this part of Western Australia, in the state of Western Australia, near Perth, south of Perth, where, for example, the Greenbushes mine, which is the world's largest lithium-producing mine, also with rock, as they're proposing in Jadar, this is not a zone of agriculture. It's mostly desert. So there's very few people there. There are Aboriginal people, indigenous people, and as you might know, Rio Tinto, as they've acknowledged, has had problems with the destruction that they've caused with cultural landmarks.
1,000 years old cultural landmarks.
Exactly, and they've apparently are taking steps to remediate that. But the difference in Western Australia is that this is not a zone of agriculture. It's not a zone of intense human habitation.
It's not connected to rivers.
And I don't know the region very well, but I do know it's a zone of desert. It's a zone where you don't have, life-giving rivers that people depend on for drinking water and so on. As far as I know, it's mostly a desert region.
In Serbia, it's very much connected with rivers that are interconnected, and in the end, ultimately used to produce drinking water. So that's one scary aspect of the problem.
If you ask the question, what makes lithium mining different? And in a way, I would say nothing really, in the sense that the mining itself is in a way not so different than other kinds of chemically intensive mining. Whether it's open pit, and thankfully they're not proposing an open pit mine, which is a different kind of destruction, but whether it's open pit or underground, you're bringing ore up from the surface. Then you have to do something with that ore to extract the minerals that you want.
To get to that level of purity you mentioned.
Exactly, to basically extract what you want. And so to do that, it requires some of the most chemically intensive interventions you can imagine, whether it's sulfuric acid or other kinds of chemicals. So you have, first of all, the issue with mining, whether it's lithium mining or not, is that it's an intense chemical intervention where you're using maybe millions of gallons of chemicals in order to get that element that is so valuable to you, whether it's gold or silver or in this case lithium. Then there's the question of amount. You're having to extract the earth and bring that up, the waste or tailings as they call them, and you're having to bring up. It could be millions of tons of earth, and what do you do with all of that debris? And then what happens with a lot of big mining companies is they look, for example, in gold mining, and I can't imagine that lithium would be any different, is they bring up the ore that they know has lithium in it, then that ore is treated chemically, and then of course the waste has to be disposed of. But then they look over to the debris and they say, well, wait a second, maybe there's lithium in the tailings. So now we're going to go back and we're going to chemically treat, we're going to press, as they call it, the tailings and extract the lithium out of that. So you're producing maybe millions of tons of debris. You're producing, again, just tremendous amounts of chemical waste when you're treating the primary ore. And then you have the process that happens on the tailings. And I've had engineers who've worked in the gold mining industry to tell me that because of, for example, gold, and lithium is not as valuable as gold, but it is becoming one of the more valuable minerals in the world. But when gold mining, for example, just to give you an idea of how this works, They will spend $1 billion to build a separate press over the tailings just to make sure that their recovery rate, as they call it, is 100%. Because you do not want to leave even 5% of gold in those tailings. You want to basically extract and squeeze, or press as they call it, all of the available ore that you can find, or the waste from the mine, to get that. And I imagine that the same would happen with this process. Now,
but what happens with the chemicals?
Well, the chemicals will have to be treated in some way. They have to be disposed of. Obviously, the plan is not going to be to just dump the chemicals in the rivers you mentioned, okay, as intentionally. That's obviously, I've looked a bit at what Rio Tinto has published. I mean, this is proprietary information. It's closely guarded. They're obviously sharing information with the Serbian government, who's then sharing this information with the European Union, because we can talk about the role of the European Union in this because it's important. So there's a plan. I have absolutely no doubt that Rio Tinto has a plan for treating the chemicals. But what I have seen also is that they have been buying up housing. So the part of the plan is absolutely to see, I think what they describe it kind of in euphemistic terms, ecosystem change or change to the environment. I mean, I think the impact is already planned as part of their project. Otherwise, they wouldn't be buying up the houses and planning for impact. Now, they would say probably that the buying up of the properties is because of subsidence, because the mine is going to cause maybe damage, it's going to create instability, people can't live there. But I think there's absolutely no question that there's going to be major impact, even under the best of circumstances. I mean, mining is an inherently harmful, destructive practice under the best of circumstances. Now, that's the best of circumstances. Now, you think of a mine, they're saying that this Jadar has a life of 40 years. Imagine, I mean, I'll be gone probably, but I hope probably many of your listeners will still be there. A mine operating day in and day out for 40 years, trying to extract as much mineral as possible. I mean, it's what we know just globally is the mines produce all kinds of waste, all kinds of impact that happens around their activities.
And this is, again, in the heart of the most fertile land in the country. That's interconnected with, it has its own ecosystem, which when disturbed, we don't know, at least to use this euphemism, we don't know what the consequences might be, but we can actually predict some of them. But the problem here in Serbia particularly, I don't know if it also refers to it can be applied to Bolivia, is that we have a government that is deeply corrupt. It's sort of a mafia state. A Hungarian sociologist called Balint Magyar has written a thesis about this kind of government. So he compares Serbian, Russian, Hungarian, and Turkish governments, and he coined this term mafia state, because these countries are run more like private organizations than like proper governments. The government is trying to do everything to destroy the institutions, especially independent institutions and media, and so they can milk what's left of the country until it's completely destroyed. And we have seen it happening over and over again. And those sort of populist right-wing governments have been historically very keen to make deals with companies that would colonially exploit the country, no matter the consequences. So that's what we are afraid of the most. I think if we had a government, I don't know what's happening in Germany, but if we had a government that realized that, okay, lithium mining could be beneficial and important, and maybe there is a way to make it ecologically acceptable, then that would be one thing. But we know these guys have bad intentions, and they have been already showing us that, because there were huge protests in Serbia, and then they said no. The Prime Minister on TV said Rio Tinto contract is cancelled. And now we hear that it's been continuing all the time, actually, behind closed doors. And now they're going into the next phase. So should we be very afraid, or just afraid, or extremely afraid?
Well, I mean, you know, I think a couple things I would say about that is that that is another question, is that in Bolivia, for example, this project, which has had a lot of problems, and it is not generating any revenue at all because it's not producing lithium at a industrial level. They're producing lithium carbonate, you know, the compound which is used in batteries, but at what they call a pilot level or a small scale, almost an experimental level. And they're in the process of moving to an industrial project, but it hasn't happened yet. The difference, of course, is that in 2017, Bolivia launched its state lithium company. So the lithium project in Bolivia is nationalized. It's a state project. So although the company, which is called YLB, which is the Spanish acronym, although they are partnering with Chinese in particular companies, but also there was a contract with a German company, they've been partnering with foreign companies. That's very different than extending, just basically giving a license to a foreign company for a fee, and for future, let's say, taxes and royalties, but the profits from what's taken go to, let's say, a different country or a different company.
Also, like the tax part goes to the government that's not going to distribute it equally.
So that's what I will say in Bolivia is that what they're doing with the lithium project, they did with the gas project. And the gas project happened, the government nationalized the gas industry in 2006. So when the first indigenous president, someone called Eva Moralesa, was elected, the first thing he did in the spring of 2006 was to nationalize the oil and gas industry, which was largely controlled by Brazilian and Spanish companies. And there was already, I guess I would say, renationalized the industry, because in Bolivian history there have been periods of nationalization and privatization, so they renationalized the industry. So there already was a state oil and gas company, and they then just put that company back into control. And over the next 12 or 13 years, Bolivia did generate billions of dollars in revenue and did manage to redistribute much of that in terms of social benefits. So they created new grants for pregnant women and students and so on. So there was a process of redistribution. Now, of course, had that not happened, had it been taken up by a corrupt government and so on, that would be different. But I think, you know, obviously Serbia is a very different case, but the fact that this is a deal with a private company under very typical conditions that you see all over the world. A private company gets a contract from the government, basically buys a license for exclusive extraction rights over X amount of time. Of course, they never want to buy, they don't really want to buy the mine. What they want is and they do this calculation. They figure out, they calculate how many years, how many decades, and then they try and negotiate for an extraction period, a license that covers that period of time, if you understand. So it could be 70 years or 60 years. Obviously they want to have it be longer than what their geologists are telling them, so to give them some margin of maneuver. And then whatever they pull out, and then they put the investments in over maybe 5 years. The mine's going to take a while for the mine to open. It could be, in this case of Jadar, it could be 2028, it could be 2029. It's usually longer than what they're saying. So if a company says, oh, it's going to open in 2027 or 2028, you might want to add another year to that. There could be protests, there could be environmental impact statements, there could be something. And then once it's opened, it doesn't begin to produce at full capacity in the first year. It takes a while for a mine to come online, as they say. So at some point it's producing maybe close to what they're thinking and generating billions of dollars in revenue. Now, from what I've read about the Jadar project, what's estimated is that the company will have to pay the Serbian government in the tens of millions every year in terms of taxes or in terms of percentage of royalties or something like that. But the vast majority of the profits, of the revenue, the wealth that's going to come from that mine is going to go to the Anglo-Australian company of Rio Tinto. It's not going to go to the Serbian people. So it's going to go to two countries that are even outside of the European Union. This is a company which has dual headquarters in London and in Melbourne, Australia. So they're not even in the European Union. So you have the initial 2.2 billion, I think, is what I read. So you have the initial amount that's being paid for the license, let's say, the rights, and then you have somewhere many years down the line these small amounts. But it's really that initial amount that counts, the 2.2 billion. What is the Serbian government doing with that? Are they using that then to build infrastructure in the country? Are they using that to improve roads and schools and other kinds of things? That would be the important question.
Even if they did, I think the political short-term play here is just to not to alienate the West, because this president is playing like on the razor's edge of being a Russian proxy and keeping like the most of the people via his tabloids completely supporting Russians and Russian invasion and Putin and so on. And on the other hand, he wants still to be close to the Western powers so they don't finance the opposition or decide maybe it's time for a change in Serbia and so on. So it's I think for him, he sees things just in these terms. Like, is this a good move now?
I mean, and since you brought up Europe, I mean, I think another dimension that your listeners should probably be aware of is the fact that Serbia, obviously the process of EU enlargement has kind of stalled, right? But there are a number of countries which are officially candidates for accession to the European Union, and Serbia is one of them. I think it's the largest country, the biggest economy in among all of the, well, maybe not in relation to Turkey, but Turkey is another complicated situation. But Serbia is definitely a country which is part of the EU process. And the EU has been desperate for the last at least 5 years to look for internal sources of lithium inside of Europe.
Well, there is Germany.
Well, there is Germany, but the deposit, from what I understand, is going to be much larger in Serbia. So far, Portugal has been really the only country in Europe that produces lithium, but not at a very large scale. And the actual reserves in Portugal turn out to be not as large by an order of magnitude as the deposit that they're saying in Serbia. So without knowing exactly the dynamics, I can imagine that the European Union is very interested in Serbia beginning lithium production. Whether it happens through a Serbian company or through a private company doesn't matter, because this could be a way, again, of bringing Serbia closer to the European Union, which has been, especially Germany, but who has the large auto manufacturers. But after 2020, there was something called the European Green Deal, which was a major policy initiative announced by the European Commission that pledged 1 trillion euros to ensure from 2020 to 2050, in other words, in 50 years, that Europe would be the first carbon neutral continent in the world. So there is a very, very concrete policy put in place just 4 years ago. And of course, then you see the demand for lithium spiking, because in that policy, lithium and the electrification of mobility is a key pillar of this European Green Deal. So what happened after that, from 2020 on, is all of the major auto manufacturers, Volkswagen, Mercedes, the major European auto manufacturers announced that they were transforming their lines, their production lines, from fuel to electric, okay? The problem is that they have to buy all of their lithium-ion batteries come from China, they come from Japan, and they come from South Korea. And the European Union and the auto companies inside of the different countries are most concerned about the fact that China dominates the global lithium-ion battery market. And so for geopolitical purposes and in a second sense for economic reasons, the European Union and the European companies are desperate to be able to produce batteries inside of Europe without having to import them from East Asia and primarily from China. So this is why you have this huge scramble. It's like the gold rush in the 19th century. Here in the UK, they've apparently found lithium in Cornwall, on the coast in southwest Britain. And so now this part of Britain, which as far back as the 18th century was they were mining tin in Cornwall, apparently in the same region you have lithium deposits. The reserves are not as big as they're talking about with Serbia, but now the rush is on to develop lithium in Cornwall, and they've proposed projects. The communities are unsure what that means. Some of the communities are objecting to the project. The same process is playing out in country after country. But I think what makes the Jadar project so different is that they're talking about, it could be 1 million tons or more of lithium, which would put Serbia up in as one of the leading producers, reserves in the world. I've read that they're claiming it's the largest deposit in the world. That's not true. Bolivia is by far the world's largest. Bolivia probably has around 30 million tons of lithium, which they haven't touched. But still, if it's 1 million tons of lithium, that's a lot. And so I think that the European Union is probably very interested in Serbia resolving its political conflict in the Jadar region so they can begin producing lithium. And that might make, and I don't know what the government of Serbia, if they're even interested in EU accession anymore.
I think they're playing with both sides. Okay. I think it's the most comfortable place for them is to stay in this state, so not resolve the Kosovo conflict and to be constantly promising like EU something and the other sides some other things, and like eternal conflict. Basically, the state of eternal conflict that's not resolved is the perfect way for them to exist, because they don't have anything to offer. Even the membership of that party is more than the membership of Communist Party in Yugoslavia from all countries combined. So they are all clients. And they have to keep the clients satisfied. And they're stealing the elections, they're doing horrible stuff, and Europe is kind of turning a blind eye because they're thinking maybe about the economy or something like that. But I think it's a mistake. I think from European perspective, I would love nothing more than to join the European Union, but not as a colony. That's the key perspective, not as a dumping ground. If they destroy Serbia in such a way ecologically, I think their interest wouldn't be to accept such a country, which is a wasteland, to the European Union, because their regulations couldn't be implemented to a country that's so devastated. So for ecological aspects of lithium mining, is the bottom line that there are horrible consequences, and is there a green way that's not destroying the fertile land to extract it?
So I think the only thing that makes lithium mining potentially green, as I said, is its end use. The fact that it is that lithium is used in batteries, which is used in electric vehicles, and storage systems, that's the only thing that makes it green. The actual mining itself, I can't imagine that there's anything that would make it any less damaging than any other kinds of chemically intensive mining and extraction that takes place anywhere in the world. I think that even if the actual process that they're proposing Rio Tinto, and I've read that they're experimenting, as I said, in California with a process of separating the boron and the lithium from the jadarite, and they have a kind of chemical that they're going to be using. Whatever that is, that's unique to that process. But what's not unique is the general process of mining in the modern age, which is very chemically intensive. The major mining companies, and Rio Tinto is, I think, the second largest mining company in the world, or minerals company in the world. They have teams of geologists, of synthetic chemists, of chemical engineers, and what they're doing is using the most modern, not the greenest, but the most modern chemical technology in order to most effectively, efficiently extract the mineral. And yes, they probably are using the best technology available to treat the waste. But that's only up to a certain point. There are certain just limits to what you can do. As I said, there's the chemicals that are used in the process. There's the sheer amount of earth that comes up. And of course, no matter what they do, you can't completely encapsulate all of the process so that there's not seepage into the groundwater and seepage into that. And of course, you know, as this is just public record. I mean, Rio Tinto and other big mining companies have dozens and hundreds of projects all around the world, in Papua New Guinea, in Australia, in Africa, Mozambique, many different places. And I think what you'd want to do is look at the environmental record of a company that's proposing a new mining project and look at their environmental record around the world and see what has happened. And even with the best of intentions, even if there was an intention to really limit environmental damage, the environmental damage is an inevitability. It is an absolute inevitability. And I think in this case, the bottom line would be is that this is going to be a very unique project in the center of an agricultural region, put in place by a company that has no lithium mines in the world. Rio Tinto is the second largest mineral company in the world, as I said, but not in lithium. This will be their first major lithium project. So there's a lot of experimental, a lot of unanswered questions here, but I think a question which we can already answer is, will there be, I mean, I don't want to use catastrophic, but
irreversible.
Will there be major irreversible environmental damage? And I think the answer is absolutely yes for this project.
Now we're getting to the at least the part that's really interesting to me from an anthropological standpoint. How do you see this as like colonialism 2.0?
Look, I mean, colonialism is a historical process in which countries, often companies acting as proxies for countries, travel around the world looking for the raw materials that are needed for industry, for the well-being of the country back wherever it was. And the history of colonialism is one in which whatever would stand in the way of that process, people, environment, was dealt with, was destroyed, was eradicated, whatever it was. So the history of colonialism is well known. I think in this case what's interesting to reflect on is that because Serbia is a candidate for the European Union, and the European Union has countries which are very much central, and those countries which are in the periphery in terms of their economies, in terms of their political influence in the European Union. And what's interesting here is because in the case of lithium, the search for lithium is very much the search for a valuable, precious mineral that is needed by, in this case, Europe as a whole, but not all of Europe. It's certain countries and certain companies which are going to be making the products which are part of this green energy transition. So in a way, it's the search on the margins, the peripheries of this zone for a raw material. And whether that's a form of colonialism or not, I mean, it certainly has some of the characteristics of colonialism, absolutely. And what we know also from colonial history is that there were always native rulers, native governments in those countries, which were very happy to make their countries available for exploitation. And why? Because they were gaining something from the colonial powers, either political power or economic wealth. So that dynamic looks very similar, absolutely.
We also have a government that's very willing to be a part of that process, just to stay in power and gain privilege to a very small circle.
I mean, you know, one of the things to keep in mind, though, is that even in an alternative universe in which there's a different government in Serbia, and Serbia is very close to join, let's say it's already joined the European Union. Coming back to the question of lithium, the demand for lithium in Serbia would still be there. Whether it would be Rio Tinto or some other entity, it could be a state company. But if in fact Serbia does have such a large lithium deposit, and imagine a different government, a much more democratic government, and again, as I said, I'm not an expert in politics in Serbia at all. I don't know much about the situation, but imagine, listening to what you said, a government which is more responsive to the people. Still, there's going to be demand, pressure to start extracting lithium because of the wider green energy transition. But I think one final thing I would say is that I think what the people, leaving aside the political situation in Serbia with this particular government, which is absolutely important, I think what the people of Jadar and this region, what they're being asked to do is in a way sacrifice their agricultural livelihoods, and the potential ecosystem for the benefit of Europe and the benefit of the world. That is what they're, I mean, you know, that's the best you can say about this. Obviously there's the more cynical answer is that it's just an economic project of one company in collaboration with the government. But under the best of circumstances, because there is going to be environmental damage, absolutely, it could be catastrophic. I mean, it wouldn't be surprising if it was catastrophic. So it could destroy the livelihoods of the people living in the area. Mm-hmm. They're being asked in a way by the world, not just by Serbia, to make this sacrifice for this green energy transition. But what people are not asking is about the green energy transition itself. Mm-hmm. All it's doing in a way is taking one form of transportation and replacing it with another, one that doesn't produce greenhouse gases, okay. But producing batteries and electric vehicles is still environmentally harmful. It still produces pollution. I mean, you have to produce a car. You have to have rubber tires. The batteries, what are you going to do with the batteries after the batteries are done? The carbon footprint of producing an electric vehicle is much worse, let's say, than you would otherwise think.
Throw them in the ocean and kill some more whales.
Well, this is the thing, and people are talking about maybe recycling the batteries, but that's not a technology which has really been developed. But I think in the broadest scale, it's still a world in which we're consuming, we're driving. So what this green energy transition is doing, and now I'm thinking about my own book, is it's fixing the future around a model of sustainability that is not as sustainable as we think it's going to be. It's not really going to affect global climate change in the way that we might imagine. And it's not going to really affect the broader impact of what we call the Anthropocene, which is this world we live in, which bears the impact of humans for over 400 or 500 years, since the time of colonialism and then moving into the period of the Industrial Revolution. And the warming climate is just one sign of our human impact. There's a lot of other negative things negative impacts that we've had, a loss of biodiversity. You know, the building of massive cities has created all kinds of environmental damage. So just building electric vehicles is just a tiny little thing that might help some micro environments or smaller environments be less polluting than they are, than they otherwise would be. But it doesn't really solve the problem, which is that we need a much bigger change at a global level in consumption patterns, in the distribution of wealth. You know, the so-called green energy transition is not really about justice. It's not about climate justice or planetary justice. It's a way of transitioning from one kind of product to another kind of product while keeping everything else the same. So I think that's, in a way, if the argument is that, you should sacrifice your livelihoods and your land because it's part of a global solution, it's not part of a global solution.
Well, capitalism is a really strange virus. It mutates and it stays alive and it adjusts and it adapts and it just keeps going on and going on. But what is the alternative? Do you have any ideas about what could actually be sustainable in a real way and what actually would be green?
Agriculture is great. Agriculture is renewable. And from what I understand, this region of Serbia does produce millions of dollars a year in revenue. It's a very fertile region. You know, you produce crops, people eat crops. That's part of the solution. Making electric vehicles versus producing corn and wheat and other things, it's clear that agriculture is a healthier activity than mining lithium for electric vehicles, let's say. But I think talking about the bigger picture, about ecology and so on, I mean, in terms of alternatives, I mean, if you're talking about transportation, I, for example, don't own a car. I bicycle, I walk. public transportation is I mean, these are all obvious things to say. But I think most of the radical thinkers around ecology are pointing to much more radical models, which would involve things like degrowth, you know, and you mentioned capitalism, and of course, yes, this particular political economy, which is now the dominant political economy globally, is based on growth. It's based on the production of wealth that requires resources, human and raw materials. It's a kind of machine. But just like with mining, a machine that produces wealth produces all kinds of other things. I didn't say wealth for everybody. It produces wealth, of course, and that wealth gets concentrated, and it requires resources. So you have to mine for those resources, or you have to produce those resources some other way. You need people. You need people to move. You need workers in factories. You need workers to do different kinds of things. So it's this incredible machine that's been around for several hundred years, but it has created absolutely historic levels of damage. So to the extent to which that machine, that political economic machine, remains the one within which this so-called green energy transition is taking place, nothing really is going to change in the big picture. So knowing that, would I be willing to sacrifice my farm and my local livelihood for something which is not going to make a difference at a global level, or even at a national level, given the fact that it's not a national company? I mean, you could make the argument, if it were a national company in Serbia and they were going to be generating hundreds of billions of dollars, the equivalent to the total GDP of Serbia. I mean, if they're mining, you know, if they're claiming to be mining producing 50,000 tons per year, or something like that, is I think was what I read, maybe 60,000 tons per year, which would make Serbia one of the leading producers of lithium carbonate. And you're talking about billions of dollars in revenue a year for 40 years. And in a country that has a GDP, I read around 55 billion dollars, that would be a significant change if there was a government that could. Okay, so you could even make the argument there that it's going to be destructive of the livelihood of people around there. It's going to destroy the farms, and in the end, the lithium we produce is not really going to do much for saving the planet. Okay, fine, but at least it's going to be a major part of economic development in Serbia.
Not even.
But not even. So I think for me, you know, and you always have to ask the question in Latin, cui bono, who benefits? Who benefits? And if you know who's going to benefit, Rio Tinto would benefit, absolutely. Whatever the government of Serbia is that's, you know, let's say collaborating or is negotiating with Rio Tinto and sees this as advantageous, they're going to benefit. But the Serbian people in general, are they going to benefit from this mine? Probably not.
But in a nutshell, that's sort of a microcosm of a global situation. I mean, if an advanced alien race would study this particular moment in history, or if we as humans survive in the next hundreds of years, and if anthropologists or archaeologists or historians look back, well, they probably going to say, wow, these guys destroyed the earth so Jeff Bezos could have one more yacht. And it sounds completely insane. Like the level of disparity between the richest people in the earth, in the world and the poorest people is just unnecessary insane.
But I agree with you, but I would add one thing. Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and others, they're not going to be on Earth at that time.
Oh yeah, they're going to be
in space. I mean, I think the SpaceX, I mean, those projects, there's no doubt. I mean, this movie, I think it was called Elysium with Matt Damon.
Where the rich live in space.
Yeah, they live in this sort of colony off. I mean, that's I think what that's about. I mean, it's this isn't even the 1%. This is the 0.00001% of
it's like 10 people
of global elite. They're going to take themselves and their families, and they're going to leave Earth, because eventually, you know, Earth is going to. Again, this is even with a so-called energy transition. The general pattern is set. You know, we have massive population growth. We have a global heating, which is going to be creating, you know, massive migrations of people, which is going to lead to conflict.
Is there any way we could end this conversation on a positive note?
Well, I mean, I think that, you know, not just anthropologists, but other scholars and others have. I mean, I think that, you know, this kind of debate this kind of discussion is important. Is that people themselves have to take control over their environments, over their ecosystems. I think leaving decision making, leaving the big decisions to governments, to companies, I think is just a losing proposition. I think that there's no doubt about it. And it doesn't matter what country we're talking about. I mean, the United States, in a way, is in as bad or worse shape than, let's say, Serbia. I mean, there's a certain what I would call a capriciousness in politics. It goes back and forth, and it changes so much that I think that people need to start thinking on much more communal, local levels about starting on much more modest scales, making their own environments as sustainable as possible, doing what makes sense. I mean, this is the thing. Just use common sense. Does it make any common sense at all to sort of be supportive of a major mining project that's going to take place underneath your fields, and it's going to produce hundreds of, you know, millions of gallons or millions of liters of toxic waste, and to trust that everything is going to be just like it was before? Does that make any sense at all? It doesn't make any sense. You don't have to be an engineer or a chemist to know that that's going to be a problem. So you're being asked, the people I think in Yadar are being asked, and not just Yadar, but that whole region of Serbia, and maybe Serbians in general, are being asked to sacrifice. So I don't think anybody has any illusions that this is going to be a sustainable, a green project. People, I think the company, Rio Tinto, everybody knows there's going to be environmental damage. The question is it worth it? Is it worth the sacrifice? That's the question that people should be asking themselves. It's not, is there going to be damage or not? The question should be, is it worth the sacrifice, knowing that there's going to be an environmental impact? And it could be a significant environmental impact. So that's the question people need to be asking themselves. And of course, people will say, but well, wait a second, what is the environmental impact going to be? And all you have to do is look around the world and see how major mining projects have created environmental damage in the area, sometimes in hundreds of hectares of area around it. And if there's rivers, even more so. Then you have waste that's traveling longer distances. So I think that's what people need to be more, use common sense, and also start taking responsibility for, if they can, if the government will allow them, and granted in an authoritarian context. And I'm not saying Serbia is authoritarian, but
it is.
if people don't have the power to act, then there's a problem, and then you say, what should people do?
But we said no.
Yeah,
like masses of people were in the streets saying a very loud no to that. So now it's a matter of saying that same word again.
Yeah,
I think more loudly, maybe.
I mean, if that protest in, I think, 2022 had an impact, then I think that would be the next. That would be a similar movement. But there shouldn't be any illusions about what this project what it's going to do for the Yadar region.
Professor Mark Gudejl at Oxford University, thank you so much.
No, thank you very much.